Great. Hi, everyone. It's Sir Rithkin from Ontier, and I'm here with His Grace Duke Michael from Artemisia. Thank you so much for joining me and for agreeing to talk to me as part of my ducal interview series.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. I just want you to know that you made a huge impression on me when I met you, because you have like this this brain where you remember like everything from all the fights, and you're just like such an impressive martial artist. Anyway, I just had to say that because I think about it every once in a while. But anyway, on these I start usually with your origin story. So if you can tell me where you found the SCA and when, that would be great.
So I think the statute of limitations has passed on the things I've done early on, so we'll go right ahead with that. So my first event was Estrella War. Basically, I had some friends said, "Hey, here's this thing. Let's go do that." And some of them had some armor they'd been fighting, and I'd been in an illustrious group before that. We did a little bit of that, and went down to Estrella, and everything was, just kind of amazing. And so, I'm like, I'm definitely going to do this. And fortunately for me, on the last day of the battles, one of the other guys came up sick. Well, a couple of us. So we ended up borrowing armor. And I ended up in this suit of armor that was not remotely legal. Like it was built for somebody at least a foot shorter than I am. I was naked from my sternum to my kneecaps just about. And I went out there and I fought, and it was horrific because I really didn't know what was going on. Like, I didn't know the rules. I didn't know like safety precautions. I didn't know armor requirements. I had a cup in, and I'm good to go. But I went out there and I started asking myself questions like, let me back up just a little bit. This was my training before my first fight, because there was a bunch of mercs that we were going to fight for, and these mercs are like, yeah, well, we'll fill you in. And I'm like, well, so what are the rules? How's this work? What do we do? How's everything work out here? And they're like, we'll tell you when we get there. And we got there, and we set up ballistas, and we did all sorts of stuff, and never got to anything. And just before the lay on horn was blown, the guy next to me says, all right, put your helmet on. I put my helmet on. He whacks me in the head. And this is all of my training before I walk into my first Estrella battle war. He whacks me in the head and says, if you get hit that hard, fall down. And that was all of it.
No rules of engagement or...
Oh, no. I went out there and I fought, and I'm like, why does nobody protect their chins? Like, I don't know. And I was basket punching people. I threw knees. I hit people with elbows. I just hit things. I kick people. I just hit people. And, I ended up talking to a guy later on, and he's like, yeah, this is the guy. Talking to one of his buddies, this guy hit me harder than anyone has ever hit my life. Oh, this guy's amazing. And I'm looking at him like, this is a guy that I know I just basket punched just right in the face. And it brought him on the field, and he's like trying to explain to his friends, like, yeah, so like I was there, and he was like, and I was like, what did you hit me with? I'm like, but it was a horror story of everything you should not be doing. I mean, if there was a rule, I was violating it. I didn't realize that, you needed a thrusting tip to stab someone in the face.
Oops.
Like, there was just, everything. Hitting people where they should not be hit. Chin shots horrifically. It was awful. And somehow nobody stopped me. And I fought all day.
All day. Wow.
Well, after the first few fights, I started picking up more and more and more, and realized, oh, I can't do that either. And I can't do that either. And I kind of understood things by the end of the day, but it was a horror story of everything you are not supposed to do on a battlefield.
Did they put you out there with a sword and shield?
Oh, yes. They gave me a 40-inch steel basket hilt sword that weighed a ton. And I had a kite shield that had a steel rim around the edge. I bet you the thing weighed 25 pounds. It was huge.
Oh, wow.
But I didn't know any different. Just fought with what you had, and
did they
not to die.
Did they tell you your shield wasn't a weapon, or were you using that as a weapon too?
Oh, no, that was a thing too.
Nice. So how did you go from, in Estrella where you don't know any of the rules to deciding that this is something you like and that you really want to get good at it?
Well, basically, I saw it and said, because I've always been into all sorts of martial arts. I have a fairly extensive martial arts background. I've been doing it most of my life. And I'm like, this is amazing. I'd love to do this. And before I left Estrella, I bought several pieces of armor. I ordered a helmet, and I was just on my way.
Wow. So you ordered a helmet at Estrella?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I bought myself a Whizbee coat of plates and ordered myself a helmet, got some knee cups and elbow cups, and put the rest of it all together later. And I had my first fighter practice not terribly long after that. But it was, and it just kind of went from there. It was kind of amazing to start that way.
Yeah. Did you have a local practice where you lived?
So we're in like this strange black hole of the middle of nowhere, Utah. We're effectively 3 hours from anyone. And we're 3 hours outside of Loch Salon. We're 3 hours from everywhere, really. But strangely, we had a fighter practice of just local guys who were kind of just normal local guys. Didn't have associations with anyone else. There were a bunch of mercs and stuff that were just like, well, we don't do SCA, but we fringe play. But we had fighter practices that ranged between 5 or 6 guys, upwards to 20 guys sometimes. And, sadly, as a general rule, none of us knew what we were doing. Like, none of us had any formal training. We were just winging it. We were faking it. We took whatever information we had and we were just going with it. My progression kind of, like, it killed off. Like, I fought 6 months in, I was beating everybody. And just with the, raw athleticism, natural talent, and the martial experience I had up to that point, figuring out how to make that translate into what we were doing. 6 months in, I kind of plateaued out. And then I stayed there until I met, Sean and Timmer and kind of got hooked up with them. And I started training with Sean, and I just skyrocketed again. Like, it just, he'd give me new information. I'd go out, I'd train it. I'd come back a week later, I'd train it. I'd come back a week later and train it. We were doing, I'd get off work at like 3 p.m. and we'd drive out to the Loch Salon fighter practice, 3 hours. We'd fight. We'd get back in the car, we'd drive, get home, and it'd be, 2 or 3 in the morning or something. Go to work the next day, drive, hit events on the weekends, hit a lot of fighter practices. My wife drove a lot with me sleeping. So we can blame her for a fair amount of my skill came from just, her support and helping me out.
Were you carpooling out to Loch Salon with other fighters, or was it just you and your wife?
Originally, it was just me. Later on, more fighters decided to come with us. Bigger brand traveled a lot with us after a while. We had a number of people that eventually did, but for a long time, it was just kind of us.
Okay. You have an extensive martial arts background. Can you talk about it a little bit?
So I have a background in Shaolin Kung Fu. I did that for a number of years. Emperor Qigong, Golden Praying Mantis, animal system stuff. It's a fantastic system. I trained with a man named Arnuford, who is just one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life. He could do things that you just literally would not believe are possible. And I got some amazing information and some amazing training from him. After he stopped teaching, I've been training in Wuji Tuan Fa, which is a closed Chinese family system, which is kind of fascinating in its origin because it's a compilation. To give you a brief history of it, back in, forever ago in China, you had a number of these families that were all noble families, and they were basically fighting for power. And as a result, they were killing each other. And so being able to fight and protect yourself and defend yourself was a very important thing. And at one point, this particular family that started this system, they sent 4 boys in different directions, took all their boys and said, go learn somewhere, sent them to various martial arts systems and masters, and said, go hide. When it's safe, you'll come back. And they all came back as masters of the respective arts. And the 4 of them kind of started collaborating together. And then they kind of took the best of the best and said, this is a better way to do something and a better way to do something. And ever since, the family has been collecting martial arts. Over the years, they've collected over 2,400 martial arts, have compiled them, and have sorted things so that it's an incredibly scientific system. And it's kind of like just magical. Like You know, you can tell you that there's the exact number of power generators are. They can tell you the exact angles of rotation that you need for maximization of power, front rear power equality, and exactly how you need to achieve that, and the mechanics behind it. The mental principles. There's meditative principles, energetic principles, and it's all just been combined in such a way that it's super refined and it's incredibly scientific, which is different than so many other systems. And my Shaolin system was an amazing system in the first place, but you know, it's kind of crazy just the depth of information that you can get. And so I've been studying that for a number of years, and I got really fortunate with that because it really was a closed family system for a very long time. And it, like literally just within the family. And the guy I'm learning it from was the first non-blood relative to get into the system.
And how did you discover that? I mean,
it kind of just worked out. I had he happened to teach a crisis intervention program. I work as like a juvenile corrections counselor. And so as part of that, we have crisis intervention training stuff where you know, learn different restraints, holds, verbal de-escalation, and a number of things like that. And the guy I was training with was Tom Garriga, fantastic martial artist. And he actually had created the system we were using for the state, and all the control holds, all the de-escalation, all of the emotional regulation we were teaching and everything. And he kind of was running all of that, and that's where I met him, and just kind of fell in. And he found out who I was studying my kung fu with, and at a certain level, you know, it's very much like the SCA. There's certain people at kind of the top of the martial arts world, just they know each other. Like you just know who someone is. Like, you know, you say, hey, Duke Shawn is, and they go, oh yeah, I know Duke Shawn. I've heard of Branos. I know that guy Uther. There's just names, they just know them. And so I kind of got in on that. And when my Shaolin teacher stopped teaching, he was really quick to offer up and say, yeah, I'd love to keep training if you'd want to do that. And so I got extremely fortunate to go from a really exceptional instructor to another really exceptional instructor.
very cool. And you kept up with that martial arts while you were SCA fighting, right?
Oh yes, yeah.
Okay. So Shawn tells me that when you came to him, you basically came with an empty cup, and he wanted me to ask you how you were able to set aside all your lifetime of martial arts training and allow him to teach you.
So that was an interesting thing, because so I look at Shawn and I know he knows what he's doing. I know he's effective. I know what he's doing works. And I'm watching him, but I'm like, there's that part of me that says, I've learned all of these things. And I kind of went, okay, that violates this rule and that rule and this thing and that thing. And I found myself going, but there's a better way, and there's a better way. But what if, you know, that martial arts paradigm of, but what if, and what if they this, and what if that, and what about this principle or that principle? And I realized that if I kept doing that, I would never get what he was going to get. And I actually had an interesting experience with a previous martial artist who was trying to train me on the side back when I was in my Shaolin system. And he was an instructor of a friend of mine, and he was trying to show me some things. And then he realized, he's like, oh, I know who you're training with. He says, and I'm not even going to try to compare with that. Like, you should just forget everything I say. He said, you know, master your stuff, and maybe I can teach you something on the side, but I can't do anything for you. He says, what you have is this pure, fantastical milk, like right from the source. He says, what I have is a little of this and a little of that and a little of this, and it's dirty milk. They call it dirty milk. He says, and if I pour my dirty milk into your glass, it's just going to be dirty milk for you. And it's not going to be remotely like what you're going to get. But he said, so, and he talked to me about just emptying a cup. You just have to empty your cup. He says, what I have is something completely different, and you have to be able to store that differently, because it's not what you're doing. And he says, I think what you're doing is better. And, you know, I don't want you to end up with dirty milk. And I kind of took that, and I realized that that's the thing. I have all this stuff, and it's not like, you know, Shawn was dirty milk. Shawn was something else. Right. But if I mix the two things together right away, they were just going to make dirty milk. You know, whatever, you know, the stuff I was getting from him was not the same thing. And as we all know, milk doesn't mix with everything. And, you know, I might end up with chocolate milk, or, you know, I might end up with orange juice and chocolate milk, and who knows. But so I made a very concerted effort to set everything aside and just say, whatever Sean says, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to try it. I'm going to get it in its purest form, try it exactly the way he shows it. Don't modify it. Don't alter it. And I do a lot of martial arts and so forth, or meditations in the martial arts, and made some very clear mental compartmentalizations for how I was storing information and how I was training, how I was competing, so that I would limit the crossover of things and do things just the way I was picking them up within an SEA context. And it became really interesting because it allowed me to, with a very open mind, say, this is what it is. This is what I'm doing. This is why he's doing it. And this is why it's working, because it's really easy from the outside to go, all right, so I know something better. I know something different. That's not the best way to do that. There's different rules. There's different guidelines for that. There's universal principles and so forth. But just doing that allowed me to really just learn it truly. And then, and at some point later, once I had reached a certain level of mastery, I said, all right, now I'm going to take this compartmentalization and I'm going to merge the two things together. And it created something magical. But I would never have been able to do that if I couldn't have just taken the pure stuff I got from each individual aspect of things and learn it to a point of mastery before I kind of blended them together.
How long did you work with Sean before you squired to him?
Oh, geez. I don't even know how exactly long it was. It was a little while, and the actual numbers I'm not sure, but I trained with him for a while, and then I was a man-at-arms for a while, and then I was a squire for a while, and I'm going to say all of that was roughly 4 years.
Okay.
And I was technically still a squire when I won crown, and when I stepped down, and I didn't get knighted till after that.
So your first reign was unbelted?
Yeah, I was an unbelted king.
Okay. So Sean also told me that I should ask you why Sean.
So, I actually, there were a number of people I was thinking about, like different reasons, and I think a big part of it was like I think Sean definitely knew he was doing it, and at the time, if I'm really honest, I'm like, a lot of these people I could say, this guy looks good, this guy looks good, that guy looks good, and as far as like martial prowess, this guy looks good, and this guy looks good, and that guy looks good, and overall package and all the different aspects of different things, different people look good. And I think we just kind of clicked. Like, we have, I think we get along really well. I think he teaches in a way that works well for me. I think we communicate well. I think it was just a good relationship.
Okay. Besides the martial aspect of the SCA, what other parts of the SCA drew you in?
So if I'm really honest, and I'll be really honest here, the fighting is what hooked me. I appreciate other things. Like I appreciate different things, I do pewter casting. I can tell a story. I do all the various knightly things. And I enjoy those things to an extent, but so much of what I love is the fighting. And I appreciate a number of things, but I just love the fighting. I love the purity of it. I love the competition of it. And I love the ability to get out there and fight full speed and full contact and not have your brain scrambled at the end of the day. And which is something I don't think as many people realize the value of that. There's so many systems that you just can't practice what you're doing in a realistic way, that the way you can in the SCA. And we have a camaraderie in the SCA where you can blast a guy in the face and beat the tar out of him and he will thank you for it.
Great.
And the next day he may beat the crap out of you and you'll thank him for it. And you will mean it. You'll say, hey, buddy, thanks for the beating. And you really do appreciate it. You're like, how'd you do that? And it's one of the few places in the world where you can really do that. And I fought in a lot of ways. I fought a lot of different, matches and competitions and styles and systems. And there's very few places in the world where you can have that same kind of relationship with different people. And it really, I think that's the part that I like the most.
Yeah. How did you evolve through weapon systems? Did you start with sword and shield and work your way into something else?
So I did start with a sword and shield. And I actually advocate everybody starts with a sword and shield. I think it's good form. If I'm really honest, I don't think it's the best form, but I think it is the easiest to get good at. I think it's the easiest for people to compartmentalize. It's easy to say, this thing does my defense and this thing does my offense, and kind of sort things out. And shields allow you, just through a certain amount of passive defense, to have a number of shots be thrown at you and not kill you. The complications for, say, fighting two swords are so much more. It's vastly more complex. Which weapon am I using? What are the angles? What part of the weapon can I parry with? And as I'm doing my defensive movements, how do I accentuate my offense? How do I transition into? Whereas at a low level of the sword and shield, it can be as simple as, I put something in the way, I hit with the other thing. I put something in the way, I hit with the other thing. And you have time to start to figure out things like range, distance, timing. What do things look like? What do power generators look like when they start? What's the timing of this? How do people flow from one thing to the next? Engaging range, fighting without fear. All these things a shield just kind of lets you do. And other weapon forms, I think, are better, but they take a lot more time to figure out and really master. And for the amount of time that it takes to master a sword and shield and get really good at that, I think you're going to spend a vastly higher amount of time with any other weapon form out there, just literally anything, because it's more complex. And something I'll tell people is you have, it's kind of like you're learning a language. Once you learn one language, you can learn a second language and a third language, and it's easier to pick those up. And I think you could spend a few years mastering a sword and shield and just get good at that, and then pick up a polearm and things will just learn faster. Pick up two swords and you'll just learn faster. Pick up anything and you'll just learn it faster than but I think if you were to start with two swords, you might be 10, 15 years down the road and not quite to a level of mastery, because you don't learn as quickly, and you get people develop certain handicaps and certain reliances that are contrary to the values of the weapon system, that if you just had a higher understanding of distance, timing, range, any of the universal principles, then you just learn it faster. And I actually think it's really valuable that I started with a sword and shield, because it really allowed me to learn things a lot faster and progress a lot better in my systems.
You keep using the term power generators. What do you mean by that?
So a power generator is anything that allows me to output force. So there are sinks, coils, displacements. Every time you pivot, that's a power generator. Every time you turn, that's a power generator. Every time you sink your body weight, every time you fall, fade, or shift your body weight in any direction is a power generator. And those are all just power generators. And there's ways those are expressed. You have soft hand leveraging. You have all these other secondary things, but power generators are just basically anything that allows you to output an amount of force.
What weapon form did you win your first crown with?
I fought Sword and Madu my first crown.
Okay. And was that your first crown ever, or was that the first one you won?
That's the first one I won. Okay. I'd done all right in a few crowns before that. And shortly before that, I kind of had an epiphany. I was doing well for myself, and I really, I think I was doing okay. I was doing well, and I was winning different tournaments and things. And then I just kind of had a moment where everything just kind of clicked in place, and all those things I had compartmentalized and sorted separately, I just had really just kind of an epiphany, and I went from being pretty good to I was just destroying everybody. And all arrogance aside, I just flipped a switch and it just changed it. And it was kind of a magical moment, and it was right before that crown that happened.
And was that the epiphany a mechanical epiphany, or like a mental epiphany, or both?
It was a chain sequence of epiphanies. It's one of those things that's like where you go, all right, so now I figured out this secret, and that secret ties into this and this and this and this. And they just it was created a chain reaction of information that kind of just sequenced out, and then it all linked back together in a way so that everything made magical sense, and the fight just got so simple. I realized just how truly, there's no way just simple the fight is. That controlling the fight, manipulating the fight, being able to govern how something happens is drastically easier than I thought. And it was just kind of a magical moment for me. And I think that just happens to people every so often. But I had, normally you'll have that moment where you're kind of fighting, you're at a plateau, and then something clicks and you go, oh, and then you're just better. You just can fight at a higher level. And that happened just a whole bunch of them right on top of each other, just stacking and stacking and stacking. And one kind of triggered the next and triggered the next and triggered the next.
Do you have, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's just kind of a magical thing, but that's kind of how it worked for me.
Do you have a way that you approach tourneys like Crown?
I just go out there and I hit the people in front of me.
Okay.
So I have, as you know from meeting me before and discussing things, I have kind of obscure memory for the fight. Like I remember details. I remember shots people threw, years and years ago. I can tell you who I fought in the Outlands tourney, and who the third round match was, and how I killed them, what the fight was, how they generate their power, how they manipulate their range, how they, engage people, how they throw their shots, how they chamber their shots, how they recover. I just have kind of a memory for things and how people do things and mechanics and a good physical memory that way. And so I'll go in and rather than, some people kind of like fight plan, like I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to fight it this way, I'm going to fight it that way. I do kind of like a fight strategy rather than, a fight tactic. And then very much, I just, kind of find that void mindset and then just let the fight happen. I just get out there. I prepare myself in advance. I've done everything I can up to the point you get to the tournament, and then it's just kill the guy in front of you. And, a lot of it, you just find that place where, you just find that void and just let it fight. And it's like the fight fights itself.
When you're assessing a fight or analyzing a fight, what do you look for that I guess imprints on you like that, or is it just your memories that way?
So a lot of it is how I steal from people all the time. Like I just steal things. Like say, oh, that's brilliant, I'm taking that. That's brilliant, I'm taking that. That's really good too, I'm taking that too. And so sometimes I'll steal a technique, or I'll steal a movement, or an engagement, or a sequence of movements, or a timing hitch, or any number of little like individual things. Sometimes it's the approach, the style they fight in, any number of little things. But it's really you find, whatever works is what you're taking, and then I figure out how to make that work. I like, and this is going to sound terrible, but I really like to tease information out of fighters, because I think everybody has something brilliant to steal from. So I'll find someone, and usually the first few fights, I just fight them. And I just see what happens. And if they crush me, I'm ecstatic, because that means I have a lot of information I can get from them. And if I crush them, it means I need to turn it down a little bit. And because there's that magical point where you fight anybody, and you kind of can get that spot where they will push and push and push and absolutely give you their best fight. And those are magical fights. And when that happens, you also get the best stuff. That's when they dig into the real stuff. That's where they have their best information, their best techniques, their best approach, their best fight happens right there. And by matching close to that point where they have to really step to get that, even if they're not quite at your caliber, they get a great fight out of it. You get a great fight out of it. And then I end up gathering a bunch of information, because everybody has things that work. I have techniques that I've stolen from people that you wouldn't even believe would be capable of providing it. I stole a timing hitch from a new fighter that was probably 3 months in. And the shot comes in at about 80% speed, has a little bit of a wobble to it, comes in a weird way that doesn't generate power right. But I'll tell you right now, I don't think I've met a dude in the world that stops the shot yet. When I modified it just ever so slightly, but I stole it from somebody who really was just not good yet. They just hadn't figured things out. But it was an amazing thing when I realized, oh, this is really valuable. And I don't think anybody recognizes it. And you can just use things that you may not have realized were there if you're just perceptive enough and give yourself time to say, why is this valuable? Why was that hard? Like I've told people, the most dangerous people in the world, the most dangerous fighters in the world are female fighters 6 months in. I really think that's true. because about 6 months in, they're powerful enough, they're fast enough, their attacks are valid, they're good enough that they can absolutely kill you. And they're still so unpredictable and abnormal in their movements and their engagements, and they haven't been ingrained to different things, and they move a little different than most of the guys you're used to, but they still might tear your head off because of these strange, unpredictable quirks. And those little unpredictable quirks are things I've just stolen over the years and said, oh, this is magic. This is just magic.
How do you like put aside some of the training and bring back some of the unpredictability?
So I think one of the big things is that you just don't have to have a style. Like some people just have a style. They have this is how I fight. And something I've been very big on is just like from the beginning is the way I fight wasn't going to be a style. It wasn't going to be a system. It was just going to be you have your base, whatever it is, and I apply something to that. I fight everyone in a customized way. There's a way where you fight where you say, I fight my fight and I'm just really good at it and I'll beat you. But in the way that we fight, in all fights, you have a rock, scissors, paper of how things work. And that's a gross oversimplification. But, if you're rock, I better not be scissors. And if I'm rock, I have to be a bigger rock than you are. But you know what? If I'm paper, I'm going to beat your rock. Unless you're a fantastically good rock.
Yeah, I think that's actually a pretty great analogy. So, because it is simple, right?
And it really is. I mean, when it comes down to it, you have all these different styles that people have. If someone fights the same way and they fight consistently that same way, they can be consistently beaten by taking advantage of whatever flaws they consistently show you. And there is no system that is without flaws. And by fully adapting or adopting any system that is a specific way of fighting, then you're just beatable. And that's something I've taken high praise from people over the years that I thought was, that's something they said that I really appreciate that. It meant that I was doing it right. I was talking to Duke Uther several years back. We were fighting in the Outlands list. And first round, I draw a guy from Ontario. He was just barely a step down as King of Ontario at the time, somewhere really close to that period. And I beat a knight from Ontario, and he's like, oh. And so he talks to the next guy, happens to be another knight from Ontario. I'm fighting the second round, and says, all right, I saw this, go try this. And he goes out there and he's like, okay, so that was totally different. And I just happened to fight like 3 or 4 guys from the Outlands in that particular, or not the Outlands, from Ontario during that tournament. And, Uther came up in the middle of the tournament, came to pick some fights with me, says, we need to fight. And I'm like, right in the middle of the tournament? Like, yeah, we're a while before we get called, let's just fight. So we fought. And he says, I just had to fight you because I watched you from the outside and I thought I had you figured out. And then it was something different. And then you fought someone else and it was completely different. And you fought someone else and it was completely different. And, when I hear something like that, I'm like, all right, I'm doing it right. That means I'm doing it right. If you can't watch it from the outside and pick me apart, I'm really truly fighting rather than just trying to impose my will with whatever system I've decided to have. And that's kind of been my goal as an underlying idea for how I fight everybody.
So for you, really, the goal is about the evolution of the fight, right? It's not about imposing your will, because a lot of people I talk to, it is about imposing your will, right?
So it's here. All right, so I'm going to back up just a little bit there. When it comes down to it, I can fight a fight that's strong enough to beat somebody. I think anybody can do that. We talk about having elemental styles in the martial arts, which is, I know a few people in the SCA kind of understand what I'm talking about when I say that, but every style has a certain elemental base to it. You have fire styles and you have water styles, and they kind of work different ways. And if you're fighting with a fire system, I can defeat it with a water system because those particular techniques beat it. It's kind of the rock, scissors, paper thing on a slightly more complex level. But if you have enough fire, there's no amount of bucket of water that puts out a house fire. And if you're just so good at it, then it doesn't matter. Just shoot your garden hose all over that house. It's not going to matter. It's not putting the fire out. You're going to lose the fire. And just being so exceptionally good at your one thing, if you are exceptionally better than the person you're fighting, you can beat them with any system that way. But if you find someone who's comparable to you, or even not quite as good at you as you are, but fights with a superior system to your own, one that has an advantage to what you're doing, you can lose to someone who's not as skilled as you are, who's not as competent or as athletic or as talented as you are, because they're fighting in a more intelligent way using a system that beats your system. And that's something that I've always kind of focused on, finding the right ways to beat people. You know, you have those different arguments of how are you fighting and what are we arguing over and what are we fighting, and you see different people that just kind of fight the same way, and you just do. You'll find certain people that have a very, very similar fashion, like Duke Sven out of Untitled and Duke Sean out of Artemisia, aren't the same fighter, but they share a lot of similarities, and they like fighting a very similar fight. And when they fight, it's really which one of them is the bigger fighter. There are modifications. They tweak, they manipulate the fight, but they like fighting so much of the same fight. It's kind of who's best at what we're doing, who's best right now at what we're doing, who executed their game best right now within the framework of the type of fight we both want to fight. But, a lot of times it's more about it should be, how am I beating this person because I'm choosing something that they're not good at. I'm going to pick a fight where they're the worst at, even if it's not the thing I'm the best at. Choosing your matchups and arguing the correct things. What am I going to control in this fight? What am I going to make sure they never get to do in this fight?
And how do you make that kind of decision? Like if you were teaching someone how to expand their fight, how would you teach them that?
So there's a number of ways you can do this. A huge thing is just seriously, watch them film, watch fights from the outside, watch your own film. And, I talk about how we kind of do this thing in the SCA where we're like, all right, this is a flat snap, and this is a leg shot, and this is a wrap, and this is an S cut, and this is a whatever else you're going to throw. Just pick any number of shots you want to throw. And it's kind of like we say, all right, well, I threw a flat snap, and then I threw an offside, I threw a leg snap, and maybe I didn't throw it fast enough or hard enough or whatever. But that really isn't why you're hitting people. I mean, sometimes I really think a lot of fighters, especially early on, and sometimes even advanced fighters, are just throwing shots because they see them, and there's not a method to the madness. They're just kind of like randomly mashing buttons on their controller saying, I hit this, I hit this, I hit this, I hit this, I hit this. And they found patterns that work, sequences that work, methods, shots, and a lot of, and don't get me wrong, there's skill to all that in the way it is, but there's a magic to be able to saying, I do this, and what's that make you do? I move my left foot forward 2 inches. What do you do? Because anytime you do something, you get information back. If I take a step towards you and you don't do anything, you've told me something. If I take a step towards you and you do something, you've told me something. You start to tell me things like, this is where I'm comfortable. This is where I like to engage range. This is when I'll attack. This is the timing of the attacks I like to do. And, something I think that new fighters need to figure out, you got to get your mechanics down. Something shortly after that is you need to figure out what happens if you do a thing. If you start to dip your shoulder slightly, what do they do? If I turn my hips slightly, what do they do? If they don't do anything when you do those 2 things, it means you can start firing that shot because they're not ready to recognize that movement as the beginning of an attack. And if they do something, you say, all right, so I did that, they disengaged. Perfect. That tells me they don't like to engage here. It also tells me that I can attack them and I can feed them this to make them make that movement again. If I sink my knee slightly and you lower your shield, well, that tells me something. If I make any sort of movement, the beginning of an attack, like the first, minuscule movement, and you do something, it's kind of this video game technology. You say, what happens when I push A? Oh, you do that. What happens when I push B? I do that. The X button? Great, wonderful. You did that. And so I'll literally tell new fighters when I'm training them, play a little bit of video game technology here, do some video game fighting, push A, see what they do. If their shield drifts to the side, that tells you if you want to set up your next shot, push A, then push X, because something else happens. And start to recognize, what are the sequences? What trigger people? What make them move? What makes them think? What makes them uncomfortable? What makes them think they're doing well? and by kind of engaging the fight and getting people to recognize these are things that control the fight. If I drift slightly to the left, do you pursue me? If you don't, I can drift slightly to the left and expect not to be pursued. If I am pursued, I know you're going to come at a certain angle. And when that happens and you consistently show that you're going to pursue me at a certain angle, I can take advantage of that. And I think that's really important for new fighters to start figuring out that it's not just I threw a shot, it landed, it didn't land. It's why did it land? It landed because you were busy transitioning from one thing to the next, or because I started a movement that made you commit to a defense that wasn't a valid one. And understanding that stuff is way more important than just, well, I threw a bunch of shots and this combination works for me. I'd be really aggressive and that just works for me. And I think a lot of fighters kind of early on get caught up in I just kind of mash my buttons and I just do things. And then I kind of just see what happens if I just keep doing that. Rather than kind of scientifically approaching it, saying, what happens if I? What happens if I? How do I control this fight? How do I dictate this fight? How do I make the person I'm fighting not capable of fighting the fight they want?
I like that.
But I think that's huge.
Yeah, I like that a lot. The why is so important, and I think you explained that really, really well. So thank you.
Yeah.
What's your favorite weapon style in the SCA?
My favorite weapon style, it's going to sound really weird because I fight with a lot of things and I have a lot of fun. I like sword and shield. I like fighting with a Madu. I like two swords a lot. I'm a huge fan of fighting with a buckler. I love fighting with a buckler because it is so much harder than fighting with anything else. I like fighting with a buckler, and I'm a massive fan of suicidal polearm. So I have a polearm that is about 3.5 feet long, like maybe a little bit longer than that, but it's not 4 feet long. And it's got a little butt spike on it. It's got maybe a 12-inch blade on the end. And it has all of the problems of a polearm and none of the perks. And it is so much fun to fight. And you lose a lot of fights, but I really, it may sound weird, but I love losing fights. I love when I can be beaten and I have to find a way to overcome the challenges. I have to find a way to win when I shouldn't be winning. And I think fighting with a buckler lets you do that. I think fighting with a suicidal polearm lets you do that. And I just really like doing that. And so some of my favorite forms are things like that. Like I think I'm definitively more dangerous with other things, but I enjoy those fights more.
I really love buckler too. It's just it's so uncomfortable. But in a fun way, right? So yeah. That's cool. So tell me about winning your first crown.
So my first crown, I think it was maybe a little bit unfair to everyone who was there because, like I was saying, I kind of had a moment where I just drastically got better and a bunch of people just did not know it yet. They hadn't seen it yet. They're like, all right, I know you're good. I know I should respect you, but you're not the guy I'm afraid is going to win this. You're not the guy that I'm necessarily think is going to knock me out of this tournament. I really was still kind of that guy that some people just didn't even know yet because I am come like from the middle of the corner of the edge of nowhere. And I just went into that tournament and I just laid waste to people. I just destroyed people. Some people didn't know what's coming. They didn't know what to expect. And they had kind of, I think some people had game planned and went, oh, I know who you are. I know how to fight you. And it was not the right answer. And we had kind of a weird, like, the tournament didn't work out the way I think it was designed to work out because we fought a pool list and I came into my pool completely clean and, I won all my fights and kind of just did really well there. And then normally from a pooled list, it's single elimination and you just end up with, like a quarter semis final sort of thing after the pools. And only so many people come out of the pools to make that work out to a magical number, which makes it a great tournament format for that. But somehow we ended up fighting double elimination and we ended up in the finals with 3 people.
Oh.
And yeah, 3-way round robin final where you fight. And if you beat both of your opponents in a row, you win. But it could technically last forever. Like if I beat the next guy and he beats the next guy and he beats me and I beat the next guy or whatever, it just cycles through. You could be fighting all day. And I was fighting His Excellency Gareth, Viscount Gareth at the time, and Duke Reinmar. And I drew the fights, and I'm like, I was just fully confident. I'm like, I just knew I had it. I'm like, I just had absolute faith that I was just going to be able to do that. And what's funny is I think my wife, who's standing there at the side, and she's watching the fights, I think she knew I could do it, but I don't think she knew it was going to happen. Like, she was just kind of watching the fights, and they're like, well, how are we going to determine who fights who first? And I said, I'll fight somebody first. Like I'm the lowest ranked person. I was unbelted at the time. I'm like, you guys should be, are the higher ranked ones. Let the Duke sit out, right? Or whatever we want to do, and I'll just fight. You guys can do whatever you want. I'll be the first fight. And so we end up fighting, and it's interesting because I end up fighting Reinmar first, and I beat Reinmar. But it was like, okay, it's round robin. It's still fighting, and it was kind of like nobody knew it was really over, and super funny.
Yeah.
Because then I fight Gareth, and I leg him. And general rule, if I can leg you, I almost never lose a fight once I've legged someone. The way I fight, I control enough aspects that it's extremely hard to lose a fight once I've legged someone. And with me able to control so much stuff, it just, it works really well for the kind of fight I have. And I legged Gareth, and I remember talking to Tiana about it, who was standing over there next to my wife, and they're just like chatting and just only sort of paying attention to the fight. And and I kill Gareth, and it's kind of like everybody paused, like, wait a minute, this was supposed to go on forever. But I killed the first guy, I killed the second guy, that means I won, right? And they're just like, you see like the list people look at each other, and the marshals look at each other, and they're like, winner. and like this long pause while everybody kind of sorted out, wait, that's really the end, and that's not when we thought it was going to happen. And I look over, and there's my wife just chatting with Tiana. Just like, I don't think she's even has a clue that it's really over yet. And Tiana pushes her out and says, get out there and go hug your man. But it was kind of interesting that way, because it was a little bit like I was the only person I think on the field who really knew how that was going to go. And I really did just have full faith that I had this. And I think a lot of other people just didn't think I would. Like, they just didn't think it was going to turn out that way. I would get beaten, or someone else it was going to be a forever sequence of people fighting, but it kind of had a surreal, like I realized I'd won, and it's almost like nobody else did. And it was kind of interesting that way.
Yeah, and Artemisia, like in Ontir, unbelted kings are rare, right?
Oh yeah, very, very rare.
So obviously you reigned unbelted your first time, so you wouldn't have anything to compare it to, but you were belted your second reign, right?
Yes, I was.
So what was the difference for you? Like, was it weird to go and sit in peerage councils when you've never sat in one?
It was a little, but I think the peers were really good with us, and they were like, I never felt like, oh, you're that guy who maybe shouldn't be here, or like everybody else here is a peer in their own right, and you just want a tournament. Like, I never felt that from our peers. I think we had really good peers. I think they were really supportive of us, and I think I never really felt that way, and I know my wife, she's first time queen also, and she did magnificently and figured things out super well, and I think it for all the you hear people have struggles and stuff as unbelted kings and first time kings and queens and so forth. I don't know that we really had that. I think we had a lot of good support. We had, the peers supported us. We had a good household helping us out with everything. And, there's a vast amount of information that, and people who doing, I mean, with Timur and Tiana and Sean and all these different people who they'd been there, they knew what was going on. And if I ever had a question, we ever had anything we didn't know, they would fill us in and let us know, I'm like, I'm not sure even what that is. I mean, I ended up being king going, I didn't even know that was a kingdom tradition. That's a thing. And like there were things I didn't know yet. And oh, that is a thing. All right. Okay. And I think we just had a lot of support and it worked out really well for us.
What was your biggest surprise reigning? Like what weren't you anticipating that surprised you?
Actually, yeah, one of the things I thought was interesting was the difference in how people saw me, that I like, especially out of the kingdom. Like I traveled at different events and they'd be like, oh, now you're king. And I had people who are like, would approach me in different ways. They're like, oh, you're king, but I fought you before. I think I can take you. And again, I'd had my moment of epiphany and was fighting way better than I think they were expecting. And so I had a whole bunch of different, like, well, I was surprised how some of them were like, I'm going to try to prove myself now because I think I can beat the king. And other people who I know were more competent, but would be like, well, you're the king now. And they would kind of like, there was a strange deference. And I'm like, all right, so that is a little different. That's a little not what I was expecting. But aside from that, I don't know, there was a lot of things that I was really kind of shocked by. Like I said, I'd been prepared really well. Sean had at several points says, look, it's happening at some point, and you need to be ready for stuff. William Gallowglass was great for that too. He had a whole bunch of experience with all sorts of things, and he helped a lot. He told me that too. I remember him telling my wife at one point, said, it's not a question of if, just so you know, this is going to happen and you need to be prepared because guys are idiots, and and he's going to need your help. And he was absolutely right, and helped us out an immense amount, and I really grateful for that.
What was your favorite part about reigning?
I think my favorite part was the being able to recognize people. I mean, I really think that was the part that I appreciated the most. And there were people like being kind of out in the middle of nowhere. I knew some people that just would never have gotten recognition otherwise. Like, I had the opportunity to, give it a few awards to people that I knew deserved it, but just would never have been on the radar. They lived far enough away. They weren't kind of mainstream players, but were very much deserving of different recognitions. And I really appreciated being able to do some of those things. And that's kind of a, like everywhere you go, you find that the people that are kind of, and don't get me wrong, like I think the big awards, like peerages are huge. Peerages are massive, and they are their own thing. But there's something magical about that AOA for that first time person who's never been recognized before. And there really just is. You're like, I'm in Montana, and you would not believe the number of recommends I got for you. Have I got something for you? And those I think have a different sort of magic. I mean, there's something to everything. And like I said, peerages are special in their own way, but there's something magical about those first time awards for
people. Do you prefer melee or individual fights?
So I definitely prefer individual fights, though I really like fighting multiple opponents, but I don't like battles as much as I like smaller scale stuff. Okay. I find that, and it's the part of me that says, all right, if I go out into melee, I'm going to go out, we're going to be fighting, I'm going to get so much fighting, and then we're all going to have to reset, we're all going to sort back out, we're going to pick up our stuff, we're going to spend 15 minutes getting reorganized, and then I'm going to be able to go out there and fight a few more people for a few minutes, and then I have to stop. Or I could be out in the pickup field and I can pick up, 20 fights with this guy. And as soon as I'm done, walk over to that guy and this person over there and that person over there and that person over there, and just keep fighting until I can't move anymore. And I just love the fights. That, and I find that, I can be very effective in battles without it being a fight. Like I like to be a spear fighter in battles as a general rule. And if you fight a spear right, frequently the people you're killing can't do anything about it. Like, you're picking off people that aren't paying attention, that don't realize I can reach them, that don't realize I'm in this position, that are fighting with a pole arm or a sword and a shield, and they literally can't do anything. They just cannot affect me. I mean, they could charge me down and I'd have to drift back in the ranks. I might have to keep myself safe, but their chances of actually like competing against me is not the same. And so there's not the same threat. There's not the same danger, which is not to say I didn't get shot. Arrows love me.
Your arrow magnet.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you would not believe it. An arrow magnet like crazy. Yeah. Oh, geez. I remember a battle at Penzik where we're fighting. I'm king at the time, and we're doing really well, but we're kind of like had this bridge. We were supposed to hold it for res battle, and so we're just fighting and fighting. And I step up to the line, and I'm like, bing, bing, kill a couple people, get shot. And I'm like, oh, that sucks, but it's a res battle. So I run 100 yards, and I come back, and I get up there, and I'm like, bing, bing, kill a couple people, and get shot. And I'm like, what the crap? And it was an hour-long res battle. I got shot 42 times. Wow. And I just, at one point, I just told the guys, I'm like, I'm going to step up. I'm going to kill those 3 guys on the right and anyone behind them who doesn't fall down fast enough. And then I'm going to get shot. So you guys take care of that hole as soon as I make it, because I'm not going to be alive very long. And I'm not going to stand back here and just not fight. And so I would fight, kill, get shot, sprint back to the res point, sprint back to the fight. Kill, get shot. And then I found out later that I'm talking to the kings on the other side, and they're like, oh yeah, we knew you were there. we had 2 archers. We just told them anytime he steps up, shoot them. Anyone else, don't fire your bolts, just wait. And they shot every one of their bolts at me, every single one. And I'm like, well, I guess that's respect, but thanks.
What Inner Kingdom War do you think you get the best pickups at?
I think Penzik's great for that, and I think Astray is kind of not kind of what it used to be, but Astray was always really good for that. Penzik was good for that. Anytime you get large groups of people like that, that you just kind of find that, and those are kind of my favorites for that. I really like the Outlands tournament. I think you get a lot of good fights there, and on the day when it's happening, you tend to get a lot of good fighters out getting pickups. And as soon as people are getting out of the list, people are just fighting and fighting. It kind of makes me feel bad when I'm still in the list. I'm like, I'm still in, and I'm looking out there on the side of the field going, oh, but I want to fight that guy, and I'm still in this tournament. I'm like, maybe I should get out of the tournaments, because now I'm doing that thing in my head where I'm like, all right, I'm getting one fight every 12 15 minutes, and they're getting 30 fights, 30 more fights, 20 more fights right there, and I'm getting jealous of like, oh, is that Lucan? I haven't fought Lucan. I gotta get that guy. And I'll just seeing all these fighters that I want to fight that aren't still in the list, and I'm like, oh. But but it's a great place to get pickup fights, and I really like just the draw of bigger lists and tournaments like that.
Is there a difference for you in satisfaction from a tourney fight versus a pickup fight? Like, do you fight at a different level?
I really don't fight at a different level. So, well, that's not entirely true. In tournaments, I just kill people. But I try not to, in a tournament, say, all right, I think you're somewhere, and I'm going to give you less of a fight. If I fight you in a tournament, I just give you my fight. I just give you my fight. This is my fight, and it's as good a fight as I can make. And I just try to make that my fight every time. When I fight people in pickup fights, I start that way. And then I modify my fight to make it a better fight for both of us. And if I fight someone who is beating me, I would step it up, and I'd find a way to beat that guy. I would find a way to change the fight, alter the circumstances, change the strategies. I would find a way to make a fight out of it. And even long before I was ever winning crown, that was that was my goal, is I'd fight a guy and I would find a way to make a fight out of it. And even if I lost, that was still just magical, because I'd get to find a way to make a fight out of it. And then on the upper end, when you're fighting people who are kind of on the other side, you bring it down enough so that it's a good fight for everybody. You say, all right, I'm going to control my fight in a different way. I'm going to fight with a style that I'm not as good at. I'm going to fight with a system I'm not as good at. I'm going to eliminate certain controls. I'm going to, take away certain advantages and still fight in an organic way. which I think is important because, I think sometimes people try to do that and it doesn't end up that way. Like, some people will fight and they're like, all right, I'm going to come out here, I'm going to put my sword and my shield up, I'm going to let you shoot at me. Block, 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 block. All right, now you've thrown 20 shots. I guess you feel all right. I can just hit you with this offside head. And I don't think that does anyone any favors because you're not fighting realistically.
Right.
But, I would do things that would be an organic fight. And sometimes I would, like, there's a lot of times I would fight with my Madu on my hip and it would just live there. And I wouldn't tell anyone I wasn't going to use it. I'd just stick blocker. I would evade shots and I would fight anyways and not just tell that person, I'm holding this so it looks like I'm fighting, but I'm making it a fight that's more interesting for everybody, that presses you more, that presses me more, that provides you more opportunities, makes me fight harder, makes you step up and try to find the ways to beat me. And, I think it's important that if you're going to change your fight, it needs to be a fight that helps everybody out. It helps you get better. It helps them get better. Because if you stand there and say, let them shoot at you, all right, so they might feel all right shooting things, but it's not realistic. They don't have a huge chance of hitting you. And when it comes down to it, that's not what a real fight looks like. That's what swinging at a pell looks like when you have a little bit of target recognition.
And as the person that gets to swing, it feels very condescending. I just have to say.
Yes.
From being there as a newer fighter, it's not a very happy fight. Anyway, we totally skipped over your knighting. Did you get knighted right after you stepped down?
Not right after, but it wasn't terribly long afterwards.
Okay. And it wasn't a surprise?
Well, it wasn't. Like, I knew it was going to happen. Nobody told me it was going to happen, but I'm like, it's going to happen at some point. And honestly, I really wasn't terribly worried about it. Like, I was wanted to be a knight, and there's things that I've wanted, but it's that same sort of, like, I knew I would at some point. I knew at some point I would be a knight, and I had absolute faith that was going to happen. And so when it happened, it wasn't like it was, I was like, oh man, it finally got there. I'm finally going to get that recognition. The recognition itself wasn't what I was looking for. I just knew that was going to happen. I was just on the path, and I was still on the path afterwards. I was on the path before, and only now I have a different color belt. And, like, and that's kind of how it worked for me.
Did you feel the same way after you became a duke as well, that the path just kept going? It's just sort of a milestone?
Yeah, well, so I talked to Sven at one point, Sven from Montier, right? And we had this conversation. He's like, I'm going to say something, and I think you probably thought the same thing, but he says, you remember that time when you realized there were kings, and you find out, like, hey, in this society, there's kings, and there's counts and dukes. Didn't you just know you were going to be one? He's like, it may sound arrogant, but like, I just kind of knew I was going to be one. And that kind of just how it was for me. Like, I just knew I could. Like, I knew it was within my capabilities. And so it wasn't like it was a shock when I won and, that second crown. I'm like, I just knew. And, at the time, like, I went in there because I fought in a number of crowns between my first and that. And I was a by fighter in all these crowns. Like, I hadn't really competed in any crown realistically between my first and my second. But, one of my best friends in the world, Timmer, he was reigning at the time, and I'm like, all right, he followed me last time, so I'll follow him this time. And I went in there like, all right, I intend to win this one. And I went in, fought a good fight, fought John in the finals. It was a great fight. And but I just kind of, like, I had that full faith, like, I'm going to do this. It's just going to happen.
I think that having that kind of full faith in yourself, like, you and Sven, I think that's kind of rare. I don't think that's something you can teach. Do you think that I'm wrong, or?
Actually, I think you can. I think that's how everyone progresses. I think they don't always start with it. And honestly, I don't think I started with it by the time I got to the SCA, because I've been accomplished enough in enough other things between my martial arts and various other endeavors in my life. I've been successful at enough things that you kind of have that understanding that I can do something. I have a belief that I can do something. I have faith that I can do something. But I think fighters do it all the time. I think it's both the thing that holds us back and pushes us forward. I mean, have you ever noticed in fights, like, people need to be convinced they can beat someone? They can get two fighters who are fighting, and they kind of say, all right, you're right here and I'm right here. And I might get lucky and I'll beat you, but you're up there and I'm down here. And they'll win a few fights and lose a few fights. And then they'll say, oh, well, they won a few more than me. So, yep, confirmed it. They're still here. I'm still here. And I've watched a lot of fighters where, and I like to think I've got a pretty good read on the fight and people's competency levels. And I'll say, that guy is as good or better than the guy he's fighting, but he doesn't believe it. That fighter does not believe they're better than their opponent. And because they don't believe it, they don't. And I find that when they do fight, it's almost like I need to fight that guy and get lucky. And like, I beat him, but maybe I just got lucky. I beat him, maybe I just got lucky. They're like, I've beat him a few times. Maybe I'm better than lucky. Maybe I'm as good as that guy. And as soon as they step up and say, I'm as good as this fighter, and they believe they're as good as that fighter, they operate at that level now. And instead of kind of like aspiring to fight a little bit better or aspiring to beat that person, they just say, this is where I am now. I am that good. I live it that good. And I think people need to kind of have those moments where their faith gets reinforced somehow, where they're like, okay, so I have faith and then I proved it. But most people kind of work the other way, where they need to get it proved. And they're like, all right, so even though I'm good enough, I kind of have to like fake my way to it. Geez, I might live here. I might actually be that good. I've faked it enough times that maybe I'm actually that good. And once they believe they're that good, they can fight that well. But in reality, I think most people think they're down here and actually operate way higher, but won't beat people because they believe that person's better than they are. They believe that they're only capable of so much. They believe that I'm coming to this fight and I may or may not win this fight. And so I sabotage myself, or I have doubts. And because of their belief structure, they limit their fight.
And how do you help somebody get out of that belief structure?
So I tell a lot of people, and it's something that I've had a number of fighters come back and tell me, of the things you told me, it was this one thing. But I tell people that, you know, in this world, there's only two types of people. There are predators and there are prey. You know, there are lions and there are sheep. And lions kill sheep. Sheep don't fight. Sheep don't kill lions. A sheep might get lucky and kick that lion, and that lion might howl off a little bit and maybe even run away. But sheep do not kill lions. Lions kill lions. And if you fight like a sheep, the best you can hope for is to get a lucky kick and maybe they run away. But when two lions fight, it's a fight. And it's a fight. And maybe you're the bigger lion, maybe you're the badder lion, maybe you're the worst. Maybe that other lion's tougher than you, faster than you, stronger than you, a better fighter than you. But if you fight like a lion, you die like a lion. And it's a fight. Lions have to fight lions. They just execute sheep. And if you fight like a sheep, plan on being executed. If you fight like a lion, get in there, fight your fight it with full faith that I can win this. Maybe not I will, maybe not I win every one, but it's possible for me to win this fight. I can get in here and I can succeed in whatever fight I fight. And I'm going to fight it like a lion. And if I die, I'll die fighting like a lion. And I am okay with that. And, you know, any of you who are, you know, fans of Eastern philosophy, you know, you'll look at the resolute acceptance of death. And that's that same basic concept of saying, you know, I walk into a fight saying, I'm already dead. And since I'm already dead and I've accepted my death and the fact that I can die, that I can fight absolutely free, because now there's nothing to be afraid of. I have nothing restricting me, nothing holding me back. I can fight my absolute best fight. And if I lose, we're great. In the SCA, you lose, you can fight again and again and again. You can try new things, you can work things out. And by just allowing yourself the liberty to lose, say, if I lose, fine. I'll lose and then I'll step right back up. You'll have to do it again. And if you beat me, you will have to do it again and again and again. And I will find a way to beat you. And if it doesn't happen in this fight, it'll be the next one or the next one. But by changing your belief structure to say, I'm going to fight in a way that is free. that just accepts the fact that if I lose, I lose, and that does not hold me back.
I love that. Like when I first met you, you told me the whole lion thing and it really resonated. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. So I've had you like an hour. So did you bring your killing tool? Can we look at your killing tool?
I do have a killing tool.
Okay.
Behold my killing tool.
All right. What's special about your killing tool? What do you like?
The fact that it takes a huge amount of time to build. I am a little bit compulsive about how I make my weapons, and I spend a lot of time making weapons so that they're just perfect for me. I had a period in time where I had changed some of my power generators, and I had changed my fight in a way that I was exploding sticks like crazy. I went into the Outlands and I was fighting a tournament. I blew up 4 sticks in the first 6 rounds. And then I borrowed a stick to fight again, and I blew up that guy's stick. And I was just hitting way harder. And I'm like, I got to do something here. There's something, like, I got to change something, because it's not even just my batch of sticks. I had, because I bring 4 weapons whenever I go. Like, I have 4 swords if I go to a tournament, because I never know if I'm going to bust one. But my sticks, I take my sticks, I bake them to get all the extra moisture out of them. And you bake them, and it actually steams out the ends if you've never done that before. But the extra moisture will steam out of the ends. It keeps them from decaying as much. I oil them, I polish them, I harden the outside, I fire harden all of my sticks with a blowtorch, basically.
What temperature do you bake them at?
350.
Okay.
So what you want to do is you put them in your oven, and you turn it to 350, and then it'll slowly cook, and you'll kind of just rotate them, but leave your oven open so it pokes out the side. Your sticks are usually long enough they have to poke out the side, and you'll start to see steam kind of coming out the ends. And then you literally just like pick them up, and you can blow in one end and the steam comes out the other, and you'll get excess moisture out of the other end. I then harden them with like a propane blowtorch, where you kind of just run the fire along the edges, and it slowly changes the color, but it hardens the outer shell. And you'll see a lot of martial arts sticks that can have those tiger stripe designs. You'll see Eskrima sticks, and Eskrima fighters do that. Tiger striping is not important so much as they take and will actually run them through fire to harden them on the outside edges, so they last longer, they don't break as easily. But I do that to make my sticks more durable. I actually put a layer of nylon on the front and the back edge of my blade to keep it from cracking as easily. And it actually, for those people who struggle to keep their thrusting tips on the edge of my weapon, on this front edge, I bring an edge of nylon all the way around, coming around the top, and then back on this other edge, and it helps hold that in and keeps it nice and soft on the top. But that strap that comes over the top helps hold the blade and the thrusting tip in place. But, I do all that. I use cloth tape. I also balance my weapons, which I don't know many people who do, but I make these little pewter cast that fit in the pommel of my weapon. So they fit kind of, just right in here. Right. I don't know if you can really see it very well here, but this bottom end of my weapon has a weight right in the end. This just one of these. So I drill a little hole, and that mounts through, slides in. It's glued in place, taped in place, and sits right there in the pommel, and provides a balance point where, your weapon balances right in here somewhere.
Nice.
And it allows it to move and shift, and very much like, any historical blade, there's a reason why the pommels were pommels. It's because they were balanced. If you've ever held a historical blade, they're designed so the balance point moves and shifts well. They're not particularly blade heavy as a general rule. And you can manipulate where you want that balance point, but very few people do. And I have played around with a lot of different weights, because I do my own pewter casting, and I cast my counterbalances out of pewter, and it absolutely changes the way that the weapon fights, and it moves like a weapon now instead of like a stick.
Very cool. Do you use a trigger or a lanyard?
Do use a lanyard. My hand moves way too much for a trigger to be valid. Like, my hands are open and moving and shifting into different positions so much that I just could never make a trigger feel comfortable. I
And
mean, there's
how
times when just my pinky's on the blade or on the handle, or a couple fingers here, a couple fingers there, and it just didn't never work for me to use a trigger.
okay. How long is your sword?
So again, that's one of those weird things in the family martial arts system I practice. They actually have a huge amount of information on making swords, and there's a bizarre formula we use that includes a number of odd body dimensions, your wrist size, your height, your weight, your different limb dimensions and so forth to find it. My blade is just about 38 inches, or my overall length is just about 38 inches.
With the weight on the back,
Yes, with the counterbalance on the back.
Okay, cool. I have never heard of anyone baking their sword before, so that is something new. So thank you for sharing that. All right, so let's do the final 10.
Okay.
I end all these things with the same 10 questions. If you could fight anyone in the world, who would it be?
So if I could fight anyone in the world, first we have all the people that would be fantastic fights that aren't realistic fights, but I'd like to fight Bruce Lee. I'd like to fight, Miyamoto Musashi. I'd like to see what that's like. I'd like to fight a Roman gladiator and see like how good are these people. I've always kind of wondered, like we don't know exactly how good they are. Like I think martial arts in general have progressed and regressed over the years in different ways, and I'd like to see what those fights are actually like. I'd like to fight those people. Something that's kind of a weird thought is I have a back injury, so I haven't been able to fight in a while. And I would like to fight, well, I'd like to fight anybody, but my sons have started fighting and I'd love to be able to fight them. And, they'd be high on the list. But, there's a lot of people I'd love to fight.
How old are your sons?
I have one that's 19 and one that's 16 that is fighting right now.
Wow. Cool. All right. What book do you think everyone on the path to knighthood should read?
Oh, geez, there's a lot of good books. I'm inclined to say that people, I don't know. I'm going to go with Unfettered Mind, which I think is an amazing book for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. It helps with the fighting. It helps with the mindset. It helps with a lot of I think people get frustrations as they're pursuing knighthood, but I think that's a good one. I think people Book of Five Rings is a good choice.
Yeah, the Unfettered Mind is so dense. It's so, there's a lot there. If you could talk about fighting with anyone in the world for an hour, who would it be?
There's a lot of people that I like doing that with. If I were to keep it to an SCA context, I like talking with Timur. I like talking with Sean. I love talking with her. I think there's some people that just have a good read on the fight. That's an interesting fight. Stefan von Dresden is a good one. Branos is a good one. There's a number of people that, I'd love to do that.
Yeah. All right. What is your favorite medieval-esque or period movie?
Medieval-esque period. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of them. If you're going to say period, things like Knight's Tale are kind of amazing. And that's seriously period-esque.
Yeah.
But, there's a number of them that way. They're that way. I think I might go with Knight's Tale just because, it's a nice, good comedic. It kind of resonates with me too, where some things are very accurate and sometimes we still sing "We Are the Champions" from the stands, and it's weird.
Yes. Who are your favorite people to watch fight?
Oh, so I think for me, sometimes it's about people. Like there's some things like I just love seeing. Like I love watching Timur fight when he giggles. Like I like that. But one of the things I like the most isn't even so much like the fighters themselves so much as the fight between them. Like I do like watching Sven and Sean fight because they agree on so much, the fight gets so pure. And it very much it becomes an execution game. And then you see other fights, like I like watching Dresden and Uther fight because they're just so different. You know, there's a lot of fighters that I appreciate watching, but I think it's more about the interplay of how they approach the fight each other rather than necessarily a single person.
Okay. What do you think is the most important trait to become a successful fighter?
The ability to lose. The ability to just to say, I can fight and I can lose and I can just keep fighting. You know, like I was telling you before, I came up in this area in the middle of nowhere. And we had fighters come and go, and some guys got better and some guys got worse and worse. And I don't know if you remember fighting Vigor Brand. Do you know Vigor Brand?
Mm-hmm.
So Vigor Brand, if we're really honest, was kind of in the middle of the pack fighter if we had all of our fighters locally. He wasn't super exceptional. He wasn't like the most amazing. He wasn't the least amazing, but he was somewhere in the middle. But he has this ability to just be like, oh, you beat me. Great. Let's do that again. You trashed me. Let's do that again. Like he has like zero liabilities from his ego. And as a result, he passed every one of those guys. Like, I think I'm the only guy locally in any way that he wasn't just trashing. And it was all work, all putting in the effort, and hugely the result of him just being able to fight a fight and not care if he won or lost, but still pursue every fight as if he wanted to win them just desperately. And then if he lost, time for another fight, time for another fight. And I really think that's the trait that makes you good. Your ability to just put your ego in your pocket and say, I can lose and get better. And I can fight every fight with absolute faith that I can win this fight.
Cool. I like that answer. What's your favorite tournament format?
My favorite tournament format, so it's going to sound weird, but I really like, like there's a lot of tournament formats that are good. I like bear pit fights where you can just get guys coming at me over and over again, where if I keep winning, I just get to stay and people just keep coming at me just because the sheer numbers of fights I get in. I like those, but if I had to pick a format that I like for the format, pooled lists. Absolutely pooled lists. I like a pooled list that, then goes to a single elimination sort of thing. I think it gives you the best fights in the end. Like, every so often you get these single elimination, double elimination fights where someone had a bad fight and whatever. In a pooled list, you have just enough flexibility. You might be able to lose a fight and still come out. Maybe you can lose 2 fights and come out. But typically, over the course of fighting your pool, the best fighters rise to the top. And there's less luck. I had a lucky shot, a good break. There's less chance early on. And then later, once you're fighting 1v1, there's your chance for, you find the one fight you need to win, do it right now. But it usually gets the best fighters getting out of the pool.
Yeah. What's your favorite event?
My favorite event? So I have a few of those. I really liked Estrella War, and to be perfectly honest, the reason why I did was I really liked, it was relatively close to where I'm at in the global scheme of things, and I could get best pickup fights without having to get to Penzik. And I love the Outlands list. I just love fighting the Outlands list. There's just so many good fighters and so much variation in it that I just love that. But one of my favorite events, aside from that, we do in the Shire of Dragon March in the middle of nowhere, Artemisia. We fight Artemisian games, and we have a number of bizarre terms. We fight a gladiator tourney where we fight with various gladiatorial weapons. We have events where you start without weapons and you rush into a pit and Hunger Games style, gather them up and go crazy. And we fight in teams and pairs and groups and singles. And we have a St. George and the Dragon tournament, which is just super fun, where you have 2 fighters that have a dragon body tied between them. And, the front of the dragon fights with, some sort of close range melee, 2 swords, sword and shield, something like that. And the back end is a pole arm or a spear, and they fight somebody. And we just have some weird fights, but it's a really good time. And the gladiator tourneys are just really fun that way.
It sounds super fun. All right. And the last question, who is your favorite fight?
My favorite fight? That's a tricky one. I mean, there's a lot of people who could be on that list, but
You
yeah.
can name more than one person if you want.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So my wife's over here saying it's the next one, which is true. My favorite fight is the next one.
There's a lot of truth in that.
My favorite fight would be the next one I get to do. But there's a lot of fighters that I've just had magical fights with. Like I've had a lot of great fights with Timur. I've had a lot of great fights with Sean, Uther. I had some magical passes at Penzik with Stefan von Dresden. There's a number of those. Jade's a great fight.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you again so much for talking with me. I really enjoyed listening to you talk about fighting. You have such a clear perspective and such a well-defined vocabulary that it's very it was very beneficial for me to listen to you, and I hope for everybody else that listened as well. So thanks again, and I really appreciate it, and I hope your back gets better and that we get you back on the field.
Oh yeah, so do I. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks everyone for joining us. On Sunday, I'm talking to Duke Hanza, and that should be fun. The guy is very good too. So thanks again, Your Grace.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.